Welcome to the deep dive. Today, let's talk Argentina. Now, you probably think tango, maybe amazing steak, but there's this incredible visual story happening with its people. If you look closely, the diversity in how Argentines look is just, well, it's unlike almost anywhere else. It often pushes back against those simple stereotypes. So, our mission today, we're going to peel back those layers. We want to get into why Argentina's population is so visually diverse. We're talking skin tone, eye color, height, hair, the whole picture. We've got some fascinating sources that really dig into how history, huge waves of immigration, and even the geography itself have literally shaped the faces of the nation.
Yeah, and something researchers constantly point out, this astonishing visual range in Argentina. It's quite remarkable. You could be, say, walking to Buenos Aires, see someone who looks completely European, tall, fair skin, maybe blue eyes. But then you travel northwest, maybe to Salta or Jujuy, and you find families with really strong indigenous features. Darker copper skin, different bone structure, thick black hair. And this isn't random. It's not just chance. It's deeply, deeply tied to the country's history and how it developed.
Okay, so this incredible diversity, this almost like kaleidoscope of looks, what's the main reason? Our sources seem to point towards something pretty specific. A deliberate plan around nation building, particularly through immigration, is that right? A conscious strategy?
That's exactly it. Argentina's diversity wasn't just something that happened, it was actively encouraged, especially starting around the mid-1800s. The government back then really envisioned Argentina as a modern sort of European-style nation, and they saw mass immigration as the key way to achieve that. So between roughly 1850 and 1950, you had, get this, over 6.5 million immigrants arrive, mostly from Europe.
Wow, 6.5 million.
Yeah, it's huge. Relative to Argentina's population at the time, it was one of the biggest mass migrations anywhere in the world. It fundamentally transformed the country.
That scale is just immense. And the sources mention Spaniards and Italians being the largest groups, right?
Dominant, yes. But it wasn't only them. You also had millions, collectively, of Germans, French, Poles, Russians, British settlers. A real mix.
So it wasn't just one or two source countries.
Not at all. But the Italian and Spanish numbers were so large, they really left a huge cultural and, well, visual imprint. Think about this. By 1914, almost 30%, nearly 1 in 3 people living in Argentina had been born somewhere else.
30%. That's incredible.
It totally reshaped the cities. Buenos Aires became this incredibly cosmopolitan place. New languages, new foods, new faces everywhere.
And crucially, this massive wave of people didn't just arrive in an empty land. They were layering over existing populations, weren't they? Indigenous groups, Afro-Argentine communities.
Exactly. It wasn't about replacement. It was layering. You had European populations settling alongside and inevitably mixing with indigenous peoples who'd been there for millennia and Afro-Argentines present since colonial times. So right from that period, you get this complex blended identity starting to form. That's the foundation for the visual range we're talking about today. It stretches across the whole country.
Okay, so we've got this picture of massive planned immigration laying the groundwork. How did that translate visually? Let's really dive into the specifics people see. Maybe start with skin tone. It seems like the most obvious place.
Good starting point. And yeah, scientists confirm Argentina has one of the widest ranges of skin tones you'll find anywhere in the Americas. It's quite striking. In Buenos Aires and across a lot of central Argentina, the Pampas region, you do find many people with fair skin. Often you genuinely couldn't tell them apart from someone from Italy or Spain. And that reflects the ancestry data too. Something like 97% of Argentines today claim at least some European heritage. It's a huge majority genetically speaking.
97%. Wow.
But, and this is key, that's not the whole story. Not even close. As soon as you move away from the central regions, the picture changes dramatically. Head northwest, towards the Andes provinces like Jujuy, Salta. Indigenous heritage is much more visible there. People often have this beautiful, darker, copper-toned skin. You see features linked to ancient Andean peoples.
So a real regional contrast.
Absolutely. Then go northeast, near Paraguay and Brazil, you tend to see more medium brown tones. That reflects a mix of European and indigenous ancestry. It's called mestizo, and also the influence of the Guarani, people who are very prominent there. And down south, in Patagonia, it's another mix. You have indigenous Mapuche traits, blending with features from, surprisingly perhaps, Welsh and German settlers who carved out communities there.
Welsh settlers. Interesting.
Yeah, a unique pocket of history there. And we also have to mention the Afro-Argentine contribution. Today, it's a relatively small community, maybe around 2% identify as such, but they add deeper skin tones to the mix. And critically, their historical numbers were much, much larger. So their genetic legacy is probably wider than current self-identification suggests. It all adds up to this incredible spectrum.
It really is a spectrum. Okay, beyond skin tone, something else in our sources really jumped out at me. Eye color. There was a genetic study mentioned from 2017.
Ah, yes. That's a fascinating one.
It found that over half of Argentines have light eyes, blue, green, or hazel. 50%. That seems incredibly high compared to neighboring countries, doesn't it? It kind of challenges that typical image of South America.
It absolutely does. Over 50% light-eyed is a direct genetic echo of that mass European immigration, particularly from Italy, Spain, and parts of Central Europe where lighter eyes are more common. So in the big cities, Buenos Aires, Cordoba, Rosario, seeing Argentines with, say, blonde hair and blue eyes, it's really not unusual. It's quite common.
Right.
Which contrasts so sharply with many rural areas, especially those with strong indigenous roots, where dark brown eyes are almost universal, reflecting those ancient lineages. And having both extremes, very fair European features and deep indigenous features, coexisting so visibly within the same country, that's really part of what makes Argentina so visually distinct.
It paints such a clear picture of these layered histories. What about physical build, height, for instance? Does that European influx mean Argentines are generally taller?
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
The stats bear that out. The average Argentine man is around 5'8". That's about 174 centimeters. Women average about 5'4" or 162 centimeters. And that does put them among the taller populations in Latin America. Again, it likely reflects that European genetic input, particularly from places like northern Italy and Spain, maybe some German and Eastern European influence too.
But I imagine there's regional variation here as well, like with skin tone.
Exactly. You see adaptations. Those northwestern indigenous populations we mentioned, they tend to be a bit shorter, stockier.
Okay.
That's often linked to adaptations for high-altitude living and farming. Down in Patagonia, the Mapuche traditionally had more compact builds, suited to the colder, harsher climate. Whereas in the cities, with different diets, different lifestyles, maybe more influenced by European norms over generations, people often tend towards being taller and leaner. So it's ancestry, but also environment and lifestyle playing a role.
So many layers. Okay, we've covered skin, eyes, height. What other features contribute to this visual tapestry? Hair texture, facial structures.
Yeah, hair is another good example. Again, you see the influence of origins. In Buenos Aires and the Pampas, wavy or straight light brown hair is very common. You see blonde shades too, not infrequently. But among populations with stronger indigenous descent, especially in the north and west, thick, straight, very dark black hair is really the dominant type. And Afro-Argentine communities, though less visible nationwide now, contribute curly and coiled hair textures to the overall mix. It adds another dimension, even if it's less widespread visually.
And facial features, I assume they vary just as much.
Absolutely. You might see finer features like narrower noses or sharper jawlines, more typically associated with European ancestry. Then in indigenous communities, you often see broader cheekbones, maybe more almond-shaped eyes. And across much of the country's interior, you find that beautiful blend, the mestizo features, that mix elements from both European and indigenous lines. It really makes it hard, almost impossible, to point to one single Argentine face.
You've mentioned indigenous people several times. Given that huge wave of European migration, how strong is their legacy today? How visible are they in modern Argentina?
That's a really important question. While they were definitely overshadowed demographically by the European influx, indigenous peoples are a vital and, I'd say, resilient part of Argentina's identity. Officially, maybe around 2.4% of people self-identify as indigenous today, but and this is interesting, genetic studies suggest indigenous ancestry is actually much more widespread throughout the general population than that figure indicates.
So the genetic legacy runs deeper than self-identification.
Often, yes. But you still have distinct communities, the Mapuche in the south, the Calmanwichi in the northern Chaco region, the Guarani in the northeast, who maintain very visible cultural identities and physical traits. Think bronze skin tones, high cheekbones, those dark eyes, strong hair textures. And in the Northwest, archaeological work actually shows clear links between ancient Indian cultures and the people living there today. It speaks to incredible resilience over centuries.
That's powerful. Now, what about the Afro-Argentine story? You mentioned their numbers are small now, but sources say they were once much larger. That gap seems significant.
It is significant, and it raises really important questions about what some sources call Argentina's hidden legacies.
Can you elaborate on that? Especially the idea of deliberate social whitening that some sources mention. How did that work?
Well, if you go back to colonial times, particularly in Buenos Aires, people of African descent made up a huge portion of the population maybe close to 30% at one point, a very visible presence.
30% is huge.
It is. But over time, several factors dramatically reduced their numbers and their visibility. Wars, particularly the Paraguayan War, where many Afro-Argentine men fought and died, played a role. Disease outbreaks, too. But alongside those factors, some historians argue there were more deliberate social and political mechanisms at play, this concept of social whitening or blanqueamiento.
What did that entail?
Sources suggest things like changes in census categories that made it harder to track mixed-race individuals, effectively lumping them into broader categories or encouraging identification as white, if possible. There was also a very strong national narrative, promoted by elites, that favored European immigration as a way to improve the nation, to modernize it along European lines. This ideology implicitly, and sometimes explicitly, devalued indigenous and African heritage.
So it was an active process, not just passive change.
That's the argument some historians make, that it was an active ideological project to build a more European-looking, European-identifying nation, to kind of craft this image of Argentina as the Europe of South America. And this history, understandably, creates controversy today. Critics argue Argentina effectively tried to erase or minimize its African roots in favor of this Eurocentric identity. So now, you have only about 2% self-identifying as Afro-Argentine. Yet, as we said, genetic studies hint that African ancestry might be more common than people realize or acknowledge. But even with reduced visual presence, you can't erase the cultural contribution. Tango, certain rhythms like candombe drumming, specific foods, Afro-Argentine influences are woven deep into the national culture. It's an indelible mark.
It really highlights how complex identity and history are beyond just appearance. So, with all this incredible mix, indigenous roots, massive European layering, the Afro-Argentine legacy, does it even make sense to talk about a typical Argentine look? Because many outsiders, maybe influenced by Buenos Aires or certain media portrayals, do seem to have this image. Tall, light-skinned, European. Our sources suggest that stereotype is pretty flawed, right?
It's deeply flawed. And it's a point of contention. That stereotype you described, it completely overlooks the rich indigenous presence, the Afro-Argentine history, and even the huge diversity within the mestizo population itself. Critics argue, quote strongly, that for a long period, Argentina's official national identity was built around this idea of whiteness. It marginalized or even tried to erase the non-European parts of its own story.
And census data sometimes reinforce that.
Until relatively recently, yes. Census methods often undercounted indigenous and Afro-descendant populations, which just helped perpetuate that skewed Eurocentric image both inside and outside the country. It became almost an aspirational identity rather than reflecting the full reality.
So if that stereotype is wrong, what's the truth? How should we think about how Argentines look?
I think the truth is, there just isn't one single Argentine look. It doesn't exist. There are only Argentine looks, plural. Imagine you're standing in the Plaza de Mayo in Buenos Aires, right in the center. Just look around you. The faces tell the whole complex story. You might see a man with blonde hair and blue eyes whose grandparents maybe came from Italy or Germany. Right next to him, maybe a woman descended from Quechua people with that beautiful copper skin, perhaps selling crafts. Then you might hear the rhythm of drums from an Afro-Argentine musician. And walking past is a university student with tan skin and striking hazel eyes, maybe a mestizo blend from the interior provinces.
All Argentine.
All completely undeniably Argentine. They share the same flag, the same anthem, the same national identity, this incredible coexistence of different ancestries, different features, all under one banner. That's not a contradiction. That is Argentina. It's the essence of the place.
A living portrait of its history. And it's not a finished portrait either, is it? Demographers expect this diversity to continue, maybe even increase?
Absolutely. It's dynamic. Migration hasn't stopped. Today you have significant communities arriving from neighboring countries like Bolivia, Paraguay, Peru, often bringing stronger indigenous features into the mix, especially in border areas. And globally, people are mixing more than ever. Intermarriage within Argentina and among Argentines abroad, which has continued to blend appearances. Like we touched on, genetic studies already show most Argentines carry a mix of European, indigenous, and African DNA, even if it doesn't always show up, obviously, in how they look. So the Argentine look of the future is likely to be even more blended, constantly challenging any leftover stereotypes about whiteness being the norm. It embraces the mosaic.
So when we ask what makes Argentina's people look so varied, so distinct, it really comes down to this epic story. Millions of immigrants arriving in a land with deep indigenous roots, land touched by Africa, profoundly shaped by Europe, all connected by its specific geography. It's a story you can literally read in people's faces, in their eye color, their hair, their skin. It's like a living library of human history and migration. So maybe next time you think of Argentina, try not to picture just one kind of face. Picture a whole nation of faces: blue eyes, brown eyes, pale skin, bronze skin, tall builds, shorter builds, indigenous features, European features, African threads woven in, all of them proud to call themselves Argentine. Because if Argentina shows us anything, it's that identity isn't about looking the same, it's about belonging together and all our fascinating diversity.